Right on. All righty. Welcome, everybody. We are live yet again. Another episode of This Week in Drones here every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. And I'm really excited to have a panel of experts on drone as first responder, DFR programs, where law enforcement agencies and fire crews and all kinds of other folks are able to use drones in creative ways to make lives safer, to make the general population safer, obviously, and then their own officers as well. And so we want to get into a couple topics about how to start up a DFR program, how to fund it, how to make it sustainable, and a whole list of really great questions that Michelle will put up here in a second. As we're live, please write in your questions, your comments. We get those in on the back end here, and I'll go through those myself and bring them up as we can for the panel. We've got a couple live callers calling in as well, which I'm excited about. I'm your host, happy to host here today, David Lewin, and I'm with Echodyne Radars. And then in a second, I'll pass it to Michelle. Before I do, I just wanted to give a shout out for our sponsor today and say thank you to Omada Group. They're making water rescues faster and safer by combining drones with emergency flotation devices like rest tube and other water safety equipment. And they're working with first responders across the country who are using drones to drop flotation devices out in the water when people are drowning or in distress, and it gives rescuers extra time to get to them. And so, they develop custom solutions as well, and for agencies that are using drones for all sorts of custom use cases. And they're writing standards for drone responders related to these, and they'll actually be there at the event next week in Virginia in person. So go visit theomada.com today to learn more. Theomada.com. So thank you so much. All right, with that, Michelle, I will pass it to you. And then if I disappear, everybody, don't worry, I'm still here. I'm just jumping to the callers and making sure they're okay, and I'll bring them up here throughout the calls. Thank you so much, Michelle. Go for it.
All right. Thank you, David. Hello, everybody again. Michelle Duquette, 3 Mad Air. For those of you who've been following us for the last several weeks, we've been focusing on public safety. It is my sense that this is the sector that has the most urgent need right now. So us being able to focus on this and identify where we can provide a hand is super important. So I appreciate you all calling in and watching this video afterwards. I think that there is definitely an opportunity for us to find ways that we can give these folks who are out there every day helping us a little bit of help in return. So one of the things I wanted to focus on today is I've been hearing in all of our several conversations we've had so far, there's a lot of DFR programs out there. And, once you've seen one DFR program, you've seen one DFR program. It's kind of like the ATC facilities. So that poses a lot of challenges. And one of the things that is sticking with me right now is that the funding is inconsistent. One of the ways to get after consistent funding is to ensure proper justification. And how we get to proper justification is being able to monetize the value of the DFR programs. I think that's also going to lend itself to showing the different departments what the realm of the possible is, because I think some of you on this call have really pushed the envelope, and you have done a great job at expanding your DFR programs. There's going to be people out there in our audience who just want to know how to get involved. They just want to know who do they talk to? Who do they follow on LinkedIn in order to learn? So today I want to get after way back in the beginning. What did you do to stand up your program? And what challenges did you face? Where do you think that you might have done something a little bit different now that you're smarter and you've learned a lot more? So I'll kick it over to Chief Roxana Kennedy from Chula Vista. And introduce yourself and then address the question, and then you can pass it on to the next person.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. It's such a privilege to be here today to talk about a program that really I think is going to revolutionize policing. I really think this is a future. I'm excited to see all the people. I know everybody that's on the podcast today, but way back in the olden days of 2015, 2016, we started talking about the possibility of drones. And before we ever flew one drone, we did a lot of outreach to our community. I think that's what made the difference for us, is that we really got the buy-in from our community prior to even launching a drone. And, you know, I laugh and I tell jokes like sometimes I would have preferred to be number two, the second one to do it instead of the first one, because with being the first one, everybody looks at you. And when there's negativity or sensationalism, they come for Chula Vista. We've been mentioned in many articles which have been challenging, especially when you read the information that's inaccurate, saying that we are focused on marginalized communities, and you know, we respond to actual radio calls. So we go where the people are calling for help. But I'll tell you, you know, I think what is really important for all of us to really talk about is sharing the stories of success. And I think that's what's made a difference for us also, is that we really did a lot of outreach, a lot of media, a lot of showcasing what it is that we're doing. When you see critical incidents occur where officers go in with no information and end up getting into a shooting or misidentify something because you can't see exactly what's happening, it appeared to be a gun. That's really how this started for us. There was an incident in our community, not in our community, but in the San Diego County community, where an officer came in and thought the person had a gun, and it actually was a vape pipe. And it made me think about, how do we make sure our officers have more information so we don't end up in a situation like this? So I think, you know, as you talk about how people start off with this, how they fund. I mean, I could go on for probably hours and hours about the value and about how you start this. I think you need to look to people who've been doing it, and all of the people that are on this podcast have been doing it, maybe in a different form, but these are success stories. And I believe we've trained probably close to 250 agencies have come to our department. I see Abrem, I remember he came out for a week and sat at our department, and we walked through it all. You have to understand the hurdles, you have to understand the challenges, and you have to understand the successes to be able to put one of these programs together. Why should you reinvent the wheel right now? There's a number of people that are doing it. But I'm going to tell you, from my perspective as a chief, I can't even imagine my officers going out in the field without having drones. We did a survey before I went and spoke at one of the conferences, and you know, cops are challenging, right? To get them to do a survey is not an easy thing, right? We got there was like 104 comments that came from a department that's 297 sworn, talking about they can't imagine policing without these drones, and gave example after example of the success stories of what these drones do. I think it's revolutionary, as I mentioned. I think it's important, but I think you need to look to the individuals who have successful programs and are doing it for the right reason, and that are going to crawl, walk, run. We're still crawling, and we've been doing this since 2018 is when we first launched our drones. And we're at 21,523 successful missions. And we're awfully proud of that, and how it's reduced time, it's saved money, and it's saved lives. And I mean, you know, we can go, Michelle, I could take over. So I'll stop there and turn it over to somebody else. But I mean, I just honestly cannot imagine policing without drones.
Well, I do want to probably at another time, you and I are going to get together and talk about the benefits that you've been tracking, because that's really important to what I'm trying to do. So thank you for that. Abrem, you want to take a shot next?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for hosting this forum, getting these phenomenal luminaries of the drone space together. So we started our drone program back in 2019 is when we began researching. So Chief Kennedy kind of alluded to the week I spent there in Chula Vista. Back in 2019, researching what drone as a first responder was, and really becoming familiar with how they made it work and how they made it fit into their workflow. And so if you don't know anything about Brookhaven, Georgia, Brookhaven is a community of about 60,000 residents, city of about 12 square miles. So a lot of people in a smaller space. A mid-sized city right next to Atlanta. So we're in the metro Atlanta area, get a lot of the spillover effects of crime from Atlanta. And so what was the motivating factor for us when we decided that, hey, DFR was the way for us to go is we were trying to find a way for a city our size who may not be able to justify purchasing a helicopter. What could we do to bring to bear that similar aviation resource to help our people solve crime and address crime? At the time, we began looking at drones, had never heard about DFR. And then we became familiar with Chief Kennedy's very first video they put out about what DFR was. And was like, hey, that's pretty cool. And I remember saying, hey, they would never give me the money to do that. And so money, you would think it'd be the first challenge. Believe it or not, once these programs take hold in an organization, money kind of becomes a small part of it. If it really makes a difference, if it saves lives like we say it does, if it keeps communities safe, if it helps us get bad guys, believe it or not, when programs are effective, we find money. And so what we've seen is now our city has been able to fund the program several years straight. It actually has its own budget, and they continue to see the priority to put money into that budget to expand the program. And so to build off of what Chief Kennedy said about, what were some of the challenges and how they dealt with those challenges, what I would say is she's absolutely right. Not being first presents a lot of benefits. And I think the primary benefit is you've got someone who paved the path. And it's one of the things I consistently ask folks is if Chula Vista made a path that we follow pretty much to a T, that has allowed us to be as successful as we were. We started a drone program, literally, a DFR program, in under 4 months. And it was because I spent a week there copying the playbook. So in 4 months to go from not owning a drone to building a fully functional DFR program, waivers and all, is partly to do because of the path we follow, and then all about the partners you bring on, who your vendor partners are, who can help you go through the waiver process and such. And so for us, being that agency that followed their path, it was relatively easy to a degree. And so what's the hardest part about managing the program? I'll say the hardest part now is what we face here in Georgia today, having a fully functioning program that is, shown its benefit to the community, and then having now legislation that threatens that. That is the hardest part, because if it wasn't just a state level ban, prior to that, it was a national ban that we were all fighting. And so I think everybody here to some degree will say that is the hardest part of it, is not knowing where the legislation or where the threat comes from. Bad guys on the ground is one thing, but you don't know what the legislators or the lobbyists or the private companies who want to enter in this space. And so another easy thing for us is back when we started our drone program, there was only one vendor in this space. One vendor in this space, one person to convince you that they had the solution, because they were the only one with the solution. And so I wouldn't want to be in the place of any agency today that's looking to build a DFR program, having to look at 3 to 5 vendors who are telling them they've got the solution. That's the hard part today, is finding out, trying to determine who you believe, who can get you to the promised land, amongst all the other challenges. And so that's kind of what our journey's been. That's where we are today. I would say it has immense benefits, and you can see those benefits just by going to any police department who actually has a DFR program and looking at the videos, looking at what they're able to do with these machines. So that's my piece. I'll pass the mic to Jason Day over in Texas.
Happy Thursday, everybody, from wherever you are in the world. So I'm Jason Day. I'm the Director of Unmanned Aircraft for the Texas Department of Public Safety. We have a very large UAS program. We cover the entire state of Texas. We're a little bit unique in this entire ecosystem and in this conversation, because we don't, as a state agency, traditionally take 911 calls. So that traditional DFR model doesn't really work. You don't call 911 and get DPS. We are an assisting agency. But one area of the state that we are responsible for on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis is our Capitol complex here in downtown Austin. And that is the Capitol grounds, and the 30 blocks that surround all of that. That's got all the government buildings and museums and things like that. So that's really kind of where we've set up our DFR model. Now, as a state agency, and I know people get mad at me sometimes, money is not really one of our big problems in the UAS program. Sometimes it's actually more of a burden, right? But our biggest issue is actually personnel. And because when we get tasked with something, normally the money comes along with that. So when we started doing 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operations around the Capitol complex, this was mandated by the legislature. And they're like, hey, we're going to give you this bucket of money. Go buy everything you need, TVs and drones and all the stuff, and you are going to secure the entire complex, right? Because this was back 2020 when we were having lots of protests and COVID and all of those things. And that money has continued to flow, but they want round-the-clock coverage. So our problem ends up being more personnel. How do we have enough people to cover that all of the time? And it's been challenging, right? All public safety, especially law enforcement, is very short on labor right now. So it's when we ask the other divisions, Highway Patrol or CID, is like, hey, can we have some of your personnel for drone operations at the Capitol? You know, the answer is almost always no, because they have other jobs to do. We're 99% of our UAS personnel, which is almost 400 people at this point, it's a collateral duty. So we were finally able to get our leadership to give us full-time personnel for the Capitol complex to be able to manage all of this. Another big part, and this goes back to how fortunate we are with money, is not only do we have our full setup at the Capitol complex, but we have duplicated that setup at our tactical training facility that's about 45 minutes north of Boston. And at that facility, this is where we train our operators how to do all this safely in very controlled Class G airspace with no aircraft that ever fly over there. But that also presented a challenge when we were dealing with the FAA. When we got our 2 COAs to do BB log, you know, the DFR type of model, there was no training component in either one of those COAs, even though one of them was specifically for our training facility. And so we got all the language back, and, you know, for operational necessity, for efficiency of operations, all of those kind of things. So we go back to the FAA and we're like, no, we're not, it's our facility. We're not doing police action at our training facility. This is just for training. And they're like, well, we don't kind of have that language in any of this stuff. So we had to go back and forth and say, we're trying to do this as safely as possible and train our people ahead of time. So can you please build in this language? And luckily they eventually did. But that kind of blew my mind, because it made me realize, how is everybody else training all of their operators for DFR missions? And the obvious answer is OJT. Well, what's the T in OJT stand for? That's great. Right? So if you are training your personnel out there in the real world, you're still doing training. And maybe or maybe not, that actually violates the language in your COA. Right. You know? So it's something we need to all consider and work with the FAA on.
That's a really good point. Okay.
And I will pass the baton over there to Matt, because he's doing amazing stuff.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for the invite to this, and I hope everybody's having a good day. So our program started in 2017 as more of a tactical program. It wasn't DFR, and initially it started for Overwatch, for barricade hostage type situations to support the SWAT team. As things grew and we added some people to it, we started branching out, doing mapping of crime scenes and car crashes where there's significant or there's life-threatening injuries. And then that kind of the natural thing that happened was they start calling us for missing persons, missing adults, you know, autistic kids wandering off, Alzheimer's folks that wander off, that kind of thing. And then when officers had say a pursuit, and if somebody's working on duty on the street, and they have a drone with them, then they can respond to that. And if they get out and run, then, you know, the drone is hopefully able to launch and help find those folks. In 2021, our chief at the time came to us and said, hey, I saw this, whatever it was, article, video, something from Chula Vista, California about this drone first responder program, and I want to do it. So I didn't have, none of us on the team actually had to go fight for this. He came to us and said, how do we make this happen? So that in and of itself was a blessing. And so we've had full support, and then we had a chief change last year, and the new chief is full support of the program. So of course, from northern Indiana, we had me and the sergeant at the time had to fly out to Chula Vista and do a site visit. And Chief, we didn't get to meet you on that day, but we met now Captain Fox and your pilot. We actually climbed up to the roof to kind of see what was going on, and of all people, Stephen Katz was up there. Happened to be flying that day for his team, and so we got to kind of see it, see how things worked, what it looked like. And then we came back and started looking for locations, places that we could fly from, where did it make sense to fly from, what areas to cover. One of the differences between us and Chula Vista is that we're 110 square miles. Chula Vista is only, 52 square miles, something in that neighborhood. So that in and of itself was like, okay, we're not going to be able to set up enough drones to cover that much area. So we specifically started to dial in where do we want to fly, what areas make sense. The downtown area made sense. Then we talked to the chief. Interestingly enough, there was some discussion on the equipment that wanted to be used. The chief thought that maybe a VTOL made more sense, but as it turned out, through more research and discussion, we ended up flying the M30 or the M300 first, just like Chula Vista was flying. And then we moved to the 30s because of how we had to set up every day. It just made more sense to have something in a little smaller package, but worked well. And now we've moved on to the docks. But one of the points that's been brought up a couple of times by Lieutenant Abrem and the chief is the media. So when we first started our drone program in 2017 and we were going to fly, we had 2 unique drones is what we were flying for just Overwatch. And we had a full red carpet rollout with the media. We invited everybody out. We said, hey, we're going to start using drones. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And the community in and of itself has been very supportive. When we rolled out DFR and started using it, we did the same thing. We invited community in. We invited the mayor. We invited city council. We invited them in and kind of explained how all this is working. Now, I had been in front of city council to buy equipment, so they kind of had an idea, but then we were able to bring them in with the media and actually show them, here's what this looks like, here's what we're doing, here's how we're responding to calls for service. So as we move forward, we look to expand with another launch location, to have 2 launch locations that can cover a solid 2 miles of downtown and even a little bit further out. And then we're operating, we just got the no VO BV loss. Well, we actually have a Part 91 and a Part 107 waiver now. But we'll be able to, with DAA, using the IRIS system, we'll be able to launch drones and not have to have a visual observer on the roof. So that's going to help us tremendously, because the other aspect that we just talked about was manpower and having enough people. Currently, myself and another officer, Mike Hickman, are assigned full-time to our unit, and then we have 10 other officers that have collateral duty, as Jason was saying that all of his folks are. So those other 10 officers can do DFR, but their main job is something else within the department, and there's only 2 of us assigned. And it's hard when somebody's out of town or they've got this or that going on to have both folks. So we had tried to get another person in. We had that for a little while, so we were able to fly more days. And then that manpower, we kind of had an issue there getting that extra help. And so last year our numbers were kind of down because we couldn't fly as much. This year we've got a little bit of help, but now we're transitioning into the full BV loss. So we anticipate to have a lot more days to fly this year. And then as far as budgeting concerns, like I said, Chief City Council have been very supportive of what we've done. And we have our own, just like Abrem said for him, we have our own line item for DFR. Our drone team has a budget line item as well, but we've also now added DFR. One of the things that we missed in the setup of docs and DAA was I can budget for all that equipment, but I needed to budget a separate line item for construction costs. So as you build a program, you have to know, if I'm going to put docks on a roof, who's paying to run power and internet to those docks? Who's buying, if you're going to set it up on a shelf or set it up on something, who's going to pay for that? If you're putting up DAA equipment, who's going to pay for wherever you're putting that equipment up? We're going to have 4 locations where we're going to have Iris, and all those locations need power and internet to be able to run the system. So that's one of the things that we didn't catch last year, and it kind of slowed us down a little bit. Although the waivers, the Part 91 waiver took a lot longer than we anticipated, and 107 came in 5 weeks. So we're happy that those waivers are done, and I always give a shout out to Officer Mike Hickman from our team. He writes all of our waivers. Fantastic job. We don't have to outreach on that. So that's been awesome for us to have him be able to do that for us. So that's just kind of I guess a 5-minute glance at where we're at and where we're moving to.
Awesome. Thank you. So I've been trying to write as fast as y'all talk. And even though you're from Texas, Jason, I still cannot write as fast as you were laying out this good stuff. I'm going to try and mirror some of this back to you. And Mike, I'm going to count on you to check me. So from your perspective, I want to make sure that I'm capturing not just from the program itself, but also the relationship that program has with the vendors, right? Make sure that we're being inclusive here. So wouldn't it be nice if we had some kind of playbook that gave you some context around what does it mean to do community outreach from a DFR perspective? What does that look like? What kind of messaging? Where do you need to go? What organizations? Is it the chamber? Is it the high schools? What is it that you need to do? There's a learn by doing that I heard from each one of you. You figured it out yourselves. Now, Chief, you really had to figure it out yourself, but you had your own drivers. And each of you had different drivers for why you wanted to have or why a DFR program made sense for you. That learn by doing part is something that I hope everybody out there in the ether is paying attention to. You don't need to have, you don't need to shoehorn this in. The whole point of this is to be able to meet the needs of your particular area of responsibility. So it's okay that if you're not hearing something exactly, that's addressing a problem space or challenge space that you have. That's what these folks have done, is they made it work for the needs, the specific needs that their environment gives them. And that's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to build some structure in here, but also have enough flexibility so that it's meaningful wherever you need to use it. And the last thing I heard was training. So Jason, I'm really glad you brought that up. I think what sticks with me most there is not that you thought of training, but that the FAA, they're not first responders. So they're not thinking like you. So it does take you all to help bring them along so that they are doing what they can to meet your needs. You can't just assume they know. So being able to write training language into your COA is something now everyone can benefit from, but it won't be the only thing, right? So there will be other folks out there who are going to come up against some unique situation. And what I want to emphasize here is the FAA wants you to tell them that. They want to know because they don't do your job. You do your job, and you're the subject matter expert, and they're counting on you to let them know. Mike, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, a few things to add to that. I think, Skyfire as a company has been around a while. Our first foray into DFR actually was doing some of the FA, supporting some of the FA arguments with Chula Vista and with Brookhaven. And then we got into more consulting, and now we're actually running a full service DFR program for Huntsville, Alabama, and I think we'll continue to do that. But having seen the different levels of that, my prior experience actually running a drone program in the federal space, I think a couple points to what you were saying. The first thing is you have to realize that the pace at which the public safety agency is running at and trying to run at is different than the pace and the agenda of the companies that are supporting this, which is different than the pace and the agenda which the FAA is running at. The FAA is probably the slowest in this group because to them, any advancement in DFR technically is more risk and responsibility for them. So they're being careful about it versus the companies who are trying to make the argument, be the first, make money, and are running at a maybe a pace out in front of what the agencies can sustain at this point, which has led this to be, everybody in this program has fought through or grinded through building a drone program. Having to do that is going away. You don't have to grind through it anymore because now there's these one-stop, shops. We can do everything for you. Just push the button and pay us a lot of money. But there's a little bit of snake oil in some of that, So there has to be a truth filter in the industry. I think my recommendation would be to everybody that they find that truth filter, that person or that agency or that company that can help them basically navigate that. Is my stuff compatible with the other stuff I have? Will it be compatible and flexible in the future? And some of those things are important to know. So I think the pace is one thing. I think the sustainment costs, which someone has mentioned, a couple have mentioned. A lot of people get money to buy a program or build a program and boom, hey, we got a program, we got people, we got a pilot, we're good to go, we got a DFR program. There's no sustainment effort after that, at least in the near term. And that's where they get killed. This program doesn't, 6 months down the road, they lose their 2 pilots, the plane crash, the drone cracks up on landing, and now they're trying to buy all this stuff back. And now there's no sustainment effort from the funding there. So I think the sustainment money is probably as important as the initial funding to consider in these programs. And so I think those are key points, and they've been mentioned, but just to reiterate that, I think it's the pace at which people are moving is varies, and you really need some help in that. You need help, I think, in determining what's really working, what's not working, and what cost is appropriate. And then I think in the sustainment, building that sustainment cost into your program to make sure that it's going to be there a year from now.
Okay, thank you. I have so many questions, but I think we're going to go to our first call-in. David's got someone on the line for us.
Absolutely. Well, awesome, guys. Great conversation. And Lieutenant Chadwick here from Amarillo, Texas, another Texan representing on the panel. And I wanted to bring you in and let you share a few words about what you guys are doing and then ask a question of this amazing panel for us to kind of dig in a little bit deeper. Go for it.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Actually, almost everybody on the panel, I've either been in some type of DFR meeting before. I don't know if any of these guys probably don't remember me, but I've definitely been on some calls with Matt, Jason, fellow Texan. We do a lot of stuff with DPS. Actually, DPS is part of the reason of DFR. As I was building out my crime center, we used to have a DPS asset here. They had a helicopter out south of town that was hangared here in Amarillo, Texas, kind of went between us and Lubbock. And as they started reducing their air assets, we're like, we don't have anything in the sky. So about 3 years ago, we started doing DFR. Chief Kennedy, super nice to see you. Captain Miriam Fox, in the 3 years ago, constant phone calls with her, very gracious with her time. And of course, everybody knows Chula Vista is like the place to go and see if you want to talk DFR. So, so the crime center was rolled last week. We tried multiple docks, different solutions. I think we found a dock, and we're going to put 26 docks to mainly at our fire stations. Well, 13 fire. That makes 2 miles apart. Question for the panel, which is something we haven't totally got to yet, would be as far as connectivity and everything with the drones, they're awesome. I love to see where this tech's going. I've got a radar out southeast of town because we do have an airport right in the middle of Amarillo that causes some but piloting. We're looking at do we make them LE? Do we bring them in? Do we civilianize the idea of the pilots? Kind of interested to know what you guys have done in that world.
I'd like to jump in on that, Michelle, if that's okay.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
So one thing, so our next thing, right, you can call it DFR 3.0 or 4.0 or however you want to phrase it, is the idea of drone as a service, where the individual agencies don't own any of the infrastructure or the hardware. And this is a model that we're building out right now on the 130 corridor here in Austin. It's about 9 miles long. We'll have drone in a box solutions, probably 1.5 miles to 2 miles apart. They will be supported with intelligent infrastructure, which is a really important piece of all of this, right? Because when you're doing DFR or remote operations, you need to have a backup to a backup, because that connection to the drone and then that connection to the internet, wherever your operator's at, has got to be 100% of the time. But you will have all of these drones strategically placed along this corridor, and all the agencies in the Austin area will then have access, whether it be LE or fire or emergency management or community, county resources, whatever. And instead of each agency paying for any of the hardware, they're just paying for a service to utilize these things. And we've figured out a lot of the model. There's still some things we haven't figured out, like prioritization of one agency over another. We have some ideas on that. But the key is going to be the public-private partnerships, because the private sector will purchase and maintain all of the equipment. Somebody still needs to go and do maintenance on the aircraft, do pre-flight inspections, build the intelligent infrastructure, manage all of that, and have the software backend with the AI tools for all the agencies to leverage. So having those relationships and building that up from the ground, up, is going to be extremely important. And I think a model like that out there in Amarillo would be really beneficial. I'll be happy to send you some information, Shane.
Yeah, no, please. That's actually interesting. The private public idea. We definitely, I mean, we use it across 8 departments that are all part of the city, and so, but the private thing is really interesting. So yeah, please do.
And Jason, do you see? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so curious, Jason, if you see legal issues at all, or with a private entity, say, capturing some footage that the law enforcement wants to utilize in a case. Is there? I've just heard like that those things can kind of become hurdles pretty quickly in that model. But I'm really curious what you've seen with that. And sorry, Roxana, Chief Roxana, I'll pass it to you after that. But Jason, do you have any thoughts on that? Have you solved through that at all?
One, how you prioritize who gets what drone?
Or the legalities of using a drone for like a case, like a footage from a drone for a case for law enforcement, depending on like who owned the drone and what it was being used for. When you start doing drone as a service, does that become an issue, or is that all kind of solved through already the way the contracts are set up or the legalities are set up?
So the operator, whether you own the assets, so there's going to be the regulatory stuff, right? Because your COAs and leasing for 90 days, that's a part we have to figure out. But from a actual operation of it, if we're paying to use the service and a DPS officer is flying the aircraft, it would be no different than if it was our hardware and they're flying it, right? Because it's their operation. The harder part, as I mentioned, is going to be the prioritization. So, kind of how we see this model is along this corridor, if there's a fire in the median of the highway, the fire department would log in and they would go fly that fire, right? An hour later, there's a fatal crash by one of the drones. Texas DPS would log in, fly that drone, map that scene. All of the imagery would be automatically uploaded, then we can process. But what if those two things are happening simultaneously? And this is where hardware selection and working with the private entities is going to be super important, because the closest drone to that fire, that's going to be lower altitude, probably going to launch that and go over there direct. But a drone that's 2 miles away from there, as long as you have good airspace awareness and all those mechanisms, it can probably fly, 1.5 miles and work at scene at the same time. So you can use multiple assets to cover multiple events, even though they're in the same AOR.
Chief, did you have something to say? You got that look on your face.
Obviously, that sounds fabulous, but I'm in California. And there is no way, maybe down the road as people get more comfortable with technology, I see things happening, but I've aged many years since I've been chief over technology and privacy concerns from community, from activists. Like I said, it's just been very, very challenging. So that's why we talk about the crawl and trying to come up with strategies. So for us, that would be really hard. We had a challenge just even getting license plate readers in our community, which are actually not live streaming. They're just taking actual snapshots of a license plate when it goes through a particular area. So that might be hard for us, but that is fabulous if Texas can do something like that, because really the amount of lives that you're going to save and the cases you're going to solve are going to be amazing. But when it comes to us in the term of staffing, that's really something that we've really run into lots of challenges with. In terms of creating a team. We've been doing drones for a long time. Way before 2015, we've been utilizing drones in a tactical sense. But when it comes to the DFR model, we have full-time DFR pilots that are sworn officers. So you can imagine the challenges that go into play with a sworn officer, in the sense they're fabulous. They've been there for 6 years. They're doing a great job. Then they want to promote, and then they promote out, and then we have to bring somebody in. So there's a lot of transferring, even with, lieutenants that are overseeing, then they get promoted, and then another lieutenant comes in, and that can be really challenging. So we have looked at civilian, but the challenge is having the institutional knowledge about policing and the operational knowledge has really been beneficial to us. So when you get out on scene and a DFR pilot that has the police training and experience sets up a perimeter differently and is kind of vectoring people in, and they're like the incident commander of the scene. So we would love to get retired officers in that civilian capacity, maybe at a different level. But the staffing part is challenging, and I think everybody is dealing with that. There's a lot of training that goes into play. Our team trains on a monthly basis, and as well as doing the on-the-job training. But you have to actually do a lot of teaching and have some more technical knowledge when it comes to the aspect of some of the systems that we have. And there's a whole documentation trail that goes into play with every one of the flights that we have, and our transparency page. So there's a lot. It's really hard to bring somebody in with no police knowledge, would be my best example.
So let me just, we've got another caller Go ahead, caller. We've got another person coming on to the podcast with us. David's gone to get. I want to mention that while he's making that happen, I've been having some really interesting conversations with folks like North Dakota. So they had a couple of years ago done a kind of like a deputizing thing where they had mass flooding. And so they needed the help of the community because they didn't have enough drone resources. And they brought them in and they walked them through an orientation, and they were given very specific things to do. Whereas the whole public safety mission was run by public safety, and basically the fire department had their drones, and they were kind of doing that orientation and leading and giving direction, etc. But it was a force multiplier for them. I was talking to somebody else who was talking about, and I don't know where it's at, Rox, but it's somewhere in California where they have it's like a deputizing program where if they have a massive search and rescue need, there are people that they've already tagged who have volunteered. They bought their drone, they volunteered, they've signed up, they've gone through some orientation, and now they're resources. They're assets that are available when you need them, so you don't have that learning curve.
Michelle, that's a perfect example of how it can work in a civilian capacity, right? Search and rescue, different things. But when I'm referring to what with DFR, I'm talking about a situation where you have a shooting or an active crime scene. That's when the law enforcement experience comes into play. But there are many other situations where I see that being hugely beneficial.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know if you will ever be able to give your main mission away. Your expertise is too explicit. However, when it comes to mapping the scene that is part of that shooting, that's something somebody else could probably do.
Yeah, Michelle, if I could real quick, we've struggled with this quite a bit on being a private company doing a DFR program for Huntsville. Our initial intent was to use all city employees, whether they were police officers, dispatchers from Huntsville and surrounding communities, as the hirees to come in and do the shifts. So it'd be an overtime, so not overtime truly for them, but it's sort of an outside their normal scope work. And we did. We have about half of our staff down there as police officers and different various community service officers and stuff from the Huntsville region, which has worked out. But we also have a couple people that are younger, that are not law enforcement background. So we always look at it as that's the first person on scene when that drone gets on station. And we want a public safety person to be sort of eyes on with that. So we've co-located that team with inside that fusion center so that there's always LE people there. A lot of times it'll be injured, someone who's on injured reserve or light duty will sit in there with us or whatever. But somebody who has LE experience is always kind of making the command decision on what that drone is doing and where it's going. So I agree with the chief that someone coming in, hiring a 25-year-old kid, no experience, putting him on the scope and saying run this is probably not ideal. But there's a lot of ways to integrate that LE experience into the person who, because now our person has the expertise in the software and the maintenance and the flying and all the things that could go wrong that the PD doesn't want to constantly train people on, paired with their experience as the first person on scene, eyes on just making decisions, and that's a pretty good pairing.
Awesome, guys. Well, we got another caller before we jump there. Shout out to all the comments. You rock, Michelle, says Christopher Schaefer. I just had to throw that in because that was right after your last comment. And then actually earlier we got a he's a beast from Brandon Carr. Thanks for commenting, Brandon. And actually I have no idea which he you're referring to, so you can all take credit for that. But maybe Brandon, you could specify. Meanwhile, let's be conscious of the time. We have about 10 minutes left, and two folks, one more person calling in after this as well. But man, brilliant comments, everybody. So I'm going to pass it to Arcady, and he's actually with the Omada group who's sponsoring today. But I actually wanted to invite him on to tell us a brief story, a success story of how these flotation devices are being used. I thought that was just such a cool use case for this, as I live by the beach over here in Virginia Beach, and my kids are out swimming all the time. And then he actually has a question for the panel as well that I wanted to give him a chance to ask. So I'll unmute you there. Arcady, go for it.
Okay, is my mic okay? Everything stable?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. So really quickly, I'd first like to thank the panel. Obviously, some of you I know directly, others I've heard all the stories. So what you're doing in this space is amazing, and I thank you as an individual, but I also thank you from the company because all of it's important. From the perspective of what David just mentioned, if you're aware, if you're not aware, May 16th of 24, Oak Island, North Carolina, they used flotation to deploy to a person caught in a rip current, save them in the space and context of things. That was the US base first. The world's first was actually down in Lennoxhead, Australia back in 2018. Myself, I've been fortunate to be part of both companies involved with the equipment or training that was involved with that. So I'm very thankful to be in the space that I'm at and working also with you guys as well. That dovetails into my question, actually. So payloads are becoming a very tangentially important aspect of the DFR programs with 108 and BVLOS coming. Obviously, payloads and situational awareness equally important. But what I'm specifically interested to hear the panel about is obviously with the increasing need for multiple emergency scenarios that you're going to be responding to. What do you say is, or how realistic is a future where obviously you're doing swap payloads in the DFR space to transition, let's say, between search and rescue, law enforcement, medical response, and what do you think might be the biggest challenges to making that a reality?
So I'll jump in with a very simple comment. If you have the right hardware, you don't need to swap out anything, right? We've got aircraft that, like the M30, it's got a great spotlight, it's got a great camera, and it's got a great drop mechanism all on there. And then you just leverage whatever tool you need during that mission. So, but there are other, obviously, agencies that have a harder time purchasing great equipment. That's all I'll say on that. And they have to think about, that payload swapping.
That's good.
Which is
Matt?
why it's so important that we get the justifications for these budgets. If we could tell the narrative that those other departments need to put in front of whomever is making their budgetary decisions, that might get them over that hump that you're talking about.
Absolutely. Matt Rowland, you had a comment?
I was just going to say, we just had that conversation last week about the future of having payloads, dropping stuff, different kinds of things. Right now, that's not really something that kind of fits, at least for us, with the dock setups that we're using. It's not really something that is, that you can do with that current generation. I would say that in the future, definitely it's something to look at. We do have a dropper on an M300. It's not a DFR drone, but we do have that ability. We have worked with it a little bit, but that's more on our trunk deployment tactical side. But that drone is available should we need to drop something. We have 3 rivers that run through this town. So obviously, and fire takes on a lot of that, with their boat and their divers and that kind of thing. But to be able to offer them the ability to, hey, we could fly this out, we could tie a rope to it, take a rope out to someone, something like that. That's something that we've been keeping an eye on. And I'd say from a DFR perspective, it's definitely something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Awesome, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks,
Arcady. Michelle,
Mike, 1 second, Mike. Arcady, thank you so much. I'm going to bring the next caller up because we have 8 minutes left, but appreciate you.
No problem, of course. Thank you.
Talk soon. Thanks. And go for it, Mike, and then I'm going to I'll introduce the next caller.
I was just going to say that's where public partnership actually might make sense, where you have a major pharmaceutical firm that has 14 locations in your city. You allow them, they want to be part of this thing, so you allow them to provide the medical supplies and the drone box on their rooftop as a sort of a rental of space, but you still deploy that on the 911 call. So in addition to your systems, which you're paying for, there's 5 systems or 6 systems out there regionally that you can dispatch with that medical kit on there, send it direct to a 911 call and drop it and come back and perch. You're not paying for that, but you're controlling that. And the pharmaceutical firm or this main retailer is really supporting that effort in the community, because it actually is not a bad idea for some of those specialized payloads.
Yeah, love it. Thanks, Mike. All right, so Robert Heisser with the City of West Palm Beach PD. Great to see you. Feel free to just introduce yourself, your program, and ask a question. And just
I really don't have too many questions right now. First of all, thanks, Jason, for everything you've done to help us out along the line. You gave us a bunch of training material. We started our drone program in 2018. We're very unique where we sit. We're in Class C airspace, our whole city, and now we got to deal with Trump. Mar-a-Lago, TFR every weekend, 30 miles. FAA has been great to us with the waiver. It's been a rough road over the last year, but it's getting better. It's getting really well now. We started out as the first DFR program for Skydio in the nation with the X-10s. And we started to be the first DFR program in the state of Florida. So we ran into a lot of hurdles with connectivity with Skydio. It's probably coming your way with them lobbying to push DJI out and everybody else trying to push DJI out. So I know most of you guys usually are flying DJI, but so far it's been doing really well. Can't complain. We fly remotely 50 hours a week from a DEA parking garage. This is my flight control room here. This is where I fly from. But so far, so good. So we'll see where it goes.
You kind of teed up Abrem.
Don't give up, Robert. Don't give up.
Yeah, well, my lieutenant wants a job flying remotely from West Palm in California. So he heard you say something. He was in here a minute ago. He just walked out to go see the assistant chief. And he goes, maybe she'll give me a job flying remotely. He goes, I got long experience.
He needs to come to Chula Vista. We have beautiful weather.
There you go.
He's got his kids in school, so he needs to stay here.
So, Robert, you teed up the last topic, actually, that Abrem really wanted to make sure we addressed today. So why don't we dive into that, Abrem? And just note we've got less than 5 minutes here till we end the live. But thanks, everybody, for your time as well. And all the questions coming in, we can't even help or get to even 10%.
Well, if I can help anybody, you're free to call me. Gladly, especially the Skydeo's pretty much got me. I've given them everything, thrown everything at them. They've been actually pretty good. I don't work for them, but they've been pretty good on accommodating and fixing issues. And they want to know how I find the problems that I find.
Cool.
So
there you go. Awesome. Thank you. Abrem, go for it. What are your comments on DJI and the swapping and all that stuff you were bringing up earlier?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is we here in Georgia walk around with, the proverbial gun to our head on drone bans. I've done the math, and for us in Brookhaven, if you ban our drones today, DJI and Altel, it's going to cost me at least $500,000 to try to replicate some of the capability that we've got. And there's a huge, if you would, discrepancy between what the legislators have been told by the manufacturers and what is available as far as the capability today. And so I would just tell everybody who is watching this and who is operating in the space that you've got to be very, very involved with what is happening around you in the legislature. You can't think that just because you're out here, catching bad guys and saving lives, that's sufficient, because there's somebody telling them that they can do it better or just as good. So you've got to be attuned to that. We're not anti-American drones. We want American drones. We want American drones because we are Americans. And we don't think it's in the best interest of our country and our state, our organizations, to have this highly relevant technology, this highly beneficial technology be controlled by what we would call an enemy or strategic adversary of the United States of America. It's not smart. But at the same time, we got to be very clear-eyed about the threat. What I've told our legislators here is if the threat is the threat, then we need to ban them today, not in January 2026 or 2028 or 2029. We need to ban them across the board. You can't buy it at Best Buy. You can't buy it at TJ Maxx. You can't buy it off Amazon. And it shouldn't just be limited to public safety if it is a national security threat, if it's a true threat. Because the law enforcement knows what threats are, and we deal with them every single day. If the threat is the threat, let's do it right now. Let's rip the Band-Aid off and let's do it for everybody. If it's not the threat that you say it is, which I'm led to believe that it's not, because I haven't seen our national government who is in charge of national security, because let's be very clear, the People's Republic of China decides they want to harm the United States, they're not going to invade the state of Georgia, they're going to invade the United States of America. Wow. And so national security is in the hands of the national leaders. And they've been very clear-eyed when they passed the National Defense Authorization Act that there needed to be more research and definitive research on what is coming out of these drones and where it's going. And so we should wait for that research, because if not, I can tell you now, the drug dealer that we caught 2 weeks ago that was selling poison in our community will be right back out here doing it again tomorrow. We won't have the two to catch him. The person that's going to go and rob and shoot somebody and think they can get away with it because they've always gotten away with it in other jurisdictions, and they forgot that when they came to Brookhaven that there was a drone and they're going to mess around and find out, they're going to be successful tomorrow, because we are not using what's between our two ears to determine, hey, what is the true threat? So I would just tell everybody to be engaged, to be involved. And to Robert's standpoint, he's got the battle scars to prove it. He's had to walk that walk and bring in an American company and spin it up to be what it is today. And he'll probably tell you there's probably some more improvements that should be made. When they're there, we'll be there. But we shouldn't get there a minute early just to say we're patriots. Let's be very clear about what the threat is and what it means. Because if you ask me today, if the threat is as serious as they're saying it is, then we should take it for everybody, not just for us who's saving lives. You can't be pro-police and then want to do things that hurt us.
I don't think, David, I don't think I could have said that better. Thank you, Abrem, for that. If I could just add, there's a lot of companies out there who overpromise but underdeliver right now. And so everyone needs to be very careful, and you need to find what's the right fit for you. I never badmouth any companies at all, but I'll tell you, we do fly DJI, and we found it to be the best product out there. And we have put safeguards in place when they talk about national security. So I have testified at Congress. I have talked to every legislator that I possibly can, but every time I've been told this is politics. It's not really about the drones. And there are companies, they're in business. They want their company to be to have the best shot. And so they're working behind the scenes, and we're all aware of that. But right now, until, I'm looking at some other options. I encourage you to test any of these companies at your facility before you buy them, because connectivity and issues come into play. What works at one department might not work at another. And if you don't have IT support, Michelle, you're going to have a lot of challenges with your drone program as well. It's a constant need. But, when it comes to this legislation, this is something that every single one of you needs to be involved in, contacting whether it's your congressman or your senator, and make sure that they understand the real story and what law enforcement needs. I know there's a bill out there right now from a congressman in California that I've been dealing with to at least give us funding through the burn grant. Now, I don't know what the ramifications will be as it finalizes, because it changes when it goes through the process, but it was to allow law enforcement to get funding. There is no funding available for us, none. And so that's why we've all had to be so creative to keep our programs going. And, like we used our police foundation. They just gave us $150,000 to buy docks for us, right? That came through the police foundation. And we still have $1.5 million budget per year to fund our drone program. So, we have a long way to go, but I hope that this doesn't discourage anyone. I hope that everybody seeks out experts in their area, or, like we said, Chula Vista is a nice place to visit. We're happy to help. We're so committed to what we're doing that's why we help. And, everyone's trying to chase our tail and say, oh, we're better than Chula Vista. We're not in a race to be the best agency. We're about DFR and about showcasing the value of it. It's not a race for us. And some things we take slower than other agencies because we want to be careful as we move forward. If we make a mistake, this is the way I feel, we're going to be on the front page of the news. So we're very careful how we move forward with the drone program.
So I think that's probably apropos for all things. I mean, you all have to be very careful because, yeah, you were first, Rox, but this is a first for us collectively, and we're trying to figure it out. I actually think that the state legislators are part of our challenge, right? It's not just those other manufacturers. Granted, yes, it is them too, but for legislation to not consider supporting an opportunity to bring in American-made stuff, maybe a buyback program or some kind of subsidy at the state level, I don't think that's too much to ask for. But yet we're seeing time and time again where that is pushed to the side for somebody else's shiny thing.
I just want to say one thing on that, both what you said and Abrem said. I don't think it's the manufacturers talking to our legislators, though, and we all know this. It's highly paid lobbyists.
Yes. Yes.
And that's when it becomes uber political.
Yes, agreed.
Add one thing. And we were obviously the first state to basically go blue on drones. But if you haven't looked, take a look at what FDLE did. They did a buyback program for DJI products. We basically got $25,000 per drone. That included our minis, our Sparks, everything that we use for indoor flight. We got originally, it was what we paid for it minus depreciation. And then they only spent, I think, $2 million out of the $25 million they were allocated. And then they gave us actually money for the ones that we turned in. And then we kept our Sparks and minis. And they said, we'll give you $25,000. All they wanted were the frames. They didn't want controllers. They didn't want batteries. They just wanted to destroy them. So that's something that if you see your state go in that direction, you might want to push to have them allocate funds through, like ours is Florida Department of Law Enforcement, who allocated the money, which was actually really good. So we ended up with over close to $200,000 in monies, which very helpful.
For those agencies that can still use DJI, we should consider a resale to them. Can they buy those at a discounted rate coming out of Florida or those states that are banning them?
I mean, but we got $25,000 for a drone that you paid $600 for.
Yeah.
So you can't beat that.
Yeah, he came out on the plus side.
And the only problem was we had to have the receipts from then. We couldn't go on and buy one currently and say, oh, we needed it between these time dates or time frames to say we bought it during this time frame. Here's the drone, and I had to drive him across to Tampa, but it was worth the $150,000 for the second turn in.
Robert, I would love to be able to sit and talk with you after this at some point so
You're
that
more
we
than
can
welcome.
document what your process was. Because I think what you have just shared is a lesson learned that while
But
it
it's
may
something that
not
you probably
be-
got to push for because if legislation saying, hey, you know, Florida, there was a lot of ups and downs when I said it was rough. Started the drone unit in 2018, and from like 20 to 23, it was in limbo whether we could fly, couldn't fly, couldn't fly. Then they told us we could buy from the DMU list, but everything on there was military grade drones or really didn't fly anymore or didn't exist. We were down to 3 drones: a Parrot, a Teal, or Skydio, and none of them really worked for long range reconnaissance. So we were kind of screwed. So we were used to our Matrice, which I still love, but unfortunately I had to turn it in.
Well, guys, great conversation. We're a good 7 minutes over the hour. Thanks everybody for hanging out. I'm sure some of you are late and messaging people to other calls. Feel free to drop off. I'll just say, thanks everyone for being here, everyone listening, commenting. Thanks to the Omada group for sponsoring it on This Week in Drones. And we'll see everybody hopefully next week in person at DroneResponders here in Virginia. So we'll see everybody later. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Michelle, I
everyone.
dropped my
Bye.
phone number.
Thank you, sir.